So you keep hearing, India is about to become the world's third biggest economy. Let's get into it. Here's the paradox. India just passed Japan to become the fourth largest economy on Earth, worth $4.18 trillion. At the very same time, roughly 4 in 10 of its 10-year-olds can't read a basic paragraph, and its own farmers spent a year blockading the highways into Delhi just to survive their government's economic reforms. By the end of this video, you'll know how India's growth actually works, why millions of its own people don't trust it, and where the real money is quietly going. Oh, and around the 9-minute mark, I'll show you the exact number India spent on schools this year. Over 1.12 lakh crore, more than $13 billion, next to the share of 5th graders who still can't read a 2nd grade textbook. Stay for that. It's one of the strangest spending versus results gaps in any major economy right now. Let's put real numbers on this. As of December 2025, India's economy hit $4.18 trillion, according to the government's own year-end economic review. Officially, the 4th largest in the world, behind only the United States, China, and Germany. Niti Aayog Chair BVR Subramaniam went further, saying India could hit 3rd place within roughly 3 years, with GDP projected near $7.3 trillion by 2030, best available estimate. 2 of the loudest signals sit inside a single supply chain, the iPhone. Apple assembled around $22 billion worth of iPhones in India in the year ending March 2025, close to 60% more than the year before. Most of that came from Foxconn and India's own Tata Electronics. By December 2025, cumulative iPhone exports out of India crossed $50 billion. Foxconn alone committed $1.5 billion for new Indian plants. Tata Electronics, a company that started in the 1800s trading textiles, now assembles somewhere between 1/3 and 40% of India's iPhones, depending on the quarter. Here's the geography detail most people miss. This shift is partly forced, not chosen. China still makes over 70% of the world's iPhones, largely out of one mega factory complex in Zhengzhou. India is the backup plan, not the first pick, and the government's production-linked incentive scheme is the financial bribe that made global manufacturers move anyway. Think of the global manufacturing map like one giant factory floor with limited space. For 20 years, China rented almost the whole floor. It had the workers, the ports, the component suppliers, all stacked next to each other. Then 2 things happened at once. US-China trade tension made that arrangement risky, and India had a spare floor sitting next to it, mostly empty, with cheap rent. That's the surface story. The real mechanism is a policy called the Production-Linked Incentive Scheme, or PLI, launched in 2020. Here's the plain English version. Instead of just giving companies tax breaks for showing up, the Indian government pays them cash rebates tied directly to how much they actually manufacture and export. No output, no payout. It's a performance bonus at national scale. Under PLI, Tata Electronics received roughly 2,068 crore rupees, about $242 million, between FY23 and FY25. Foxconn received about 2,807 crore rupees, roughly $328 million, in the same window. That's not free money. It's a reward for hitting export targets, and it's exactly why India's iPhone exports tripled between January and May 2025 compared to the year before, reaching $9.35 billion in those 5 months alone. Now here's the "wait, that means" moment. Nearly 97% of Apple's Indian exports in the March to May 2025 quarter went straight to the United States. That's not India selling to the world. That's India becoming America's alternate supplier, specifically because Washington wanted less dependence on Beijing. Wait, That means India's manufacturing boom is running on geopolitics as much as on India's own competitiveness. If US-China tensions ever cool down, some of this incentive to relocate cools down with it. There's a second engine underneath all of this, and it's less flattering: India's demographic dividend. That's the economic term for having a large share of your population in working age, roughly 15 to 64, relative to children and retirees. India has around 900 million people in that bracket. In theory, more workers means more output, more consumption, more tax revenue. It's the same structural tailwind that powered China's boom in the 1990s and 2000s. But a dividend only pays out if there are jobs to put people into. And here's where the story gets uglier. Services now contribute 54% of India's GDP, but under 30% of its jobs, according to recent labor data. Manufacturing and tech-driven growth tend to be capital-intensive, not labor-intensive, meaning a factory can produce far more output today with far fewer new hires than an equivalent factory needed 30 years ago. Robotics, automation, and lean staffing all cut into how many people GDP growth actually employs. That mismatch has a name economists use bluntly: jobless growth. GDP climbs, stock indices climb, and the number of new jobs created doesn't climb nearly as fast. Among India's college graduates specifically, unemployment sits around 11.2%, more than 3 times the national average, according to 2025's Periodic Labour Force Survey. The India Skills Report 2025 found only about 54.8% of Indian graduates are considered employable by industry standards at all. The other 45% hold degrees that don't map to available jobs, so you get a country simultaneously producing world-class iPhone exports and struggling to employ its own most educated young people. Those aren't contradictory facts. They're the same mechanism, viewed from 2 different rooms. One-sentence summary you can screenshot. India's headline growth is being manufactured by targeted government incentives and geopolitical rerouting of factories, not primarily by broad-based job creation for its own population. Failure 1. The 2020 Farm Laws. In September 2020, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government passed 3 laws deregulating how farmers could sell crops, opening the sector to large private buyers without the traditional government-guaranteed minimum price. The mistake: the laws were passed with almost no consultation with farmer unions, in a sector employing roughly 40% of India's workforce. The cost: farmers occupied highways into Delhi for over a year. More than 600 farmers reportedly died during the protest, mostly from harsh winter conditions and exposure. On November 19, 2021, Modi announced a full repeal on national television, a signature economic reform reversed in its entirety. Failure 2. Education spending without outcome tracking. India's 2025-26 union budget allocated over 1.12 lakh crore rupees to school education, the highest nominal figure in the country's history. The mistake: that money went overwhelmingly into buildings, tablets, and midday meals, not measurable teaching quality. The cost: ASA 2024 data shows around 35 to 40% of rural grade 5 students still can't fluently read a grade 2 level text, and roughly 75% of grade 3 children can't do basic subtraction. Nearly 10.7 lakh government teaching posts sit vacant nationally. Failure 3. Byju's. India's most valuable startup ever, an edtech company hitting a $22 billion valuation in 2022. The mistake: aggressive, poorly governed acquisitions funded by a $1.2 billion US loan, plus accounting practices that later drew scrutiny from lenders and auditors. The cost: by mid-2024, Byju's entered insolvency proceedings in India's National Company Law Tribunal, triggered initially by a modest unpaid debt to India's Cricket Board. By October 2024, founder Biju Ravindran himself said the company was worth zero. Two recurring patterns emerge. Pattern 1. Speed without consultation. Big reforms and big spending get announced fast, at scale, without building buy-in from the people they affect. The farm laws and the education budget both show this. Pattern 2. Growth without guardrails. Capital chases fast expansion, and governance checks arrive only after the damage is visible. Biju's is the private sector version of the same instinct that drives PLI-fueled manufacturing sprints. Small entry, retail scale, an everyday Indian investor opening a mutual fund SIP, a systematic investment plan with as little as $500 a month, roughly $6, can now buy into Nifty 50 index funds, tracking the same growth story, driving the headlines. Monthly SIP inflows across India have run in the tens of thousands of crores per month in recent years. Best available estimate, reflecting a huge surge in retail participation in the stock market since 2020. Full-scale corporate entry. Compare that to Foxconn's $1.5 billion single-plant commitment near Bengaluru, or Apple's cumulative $50 billion in iPhone exports out of India by December 2025. These aren't comparable in size, but they're the same underlying bet that India's manufacturing base keeps growing, made at wildly different stakes. Who got it right? Tata Electronics. In 2024, it held roughly 13% of India's iPhone export share. By 2025, after absorbing Wistron's Karnataka factory and expanding operations in Hosur, Tamil Nadu, its share rose to somewhere between 37% and 40%, according to analyst estimates from Canalys. Some analysts now project Tata could handle half of India's total iPhone assembly within 2 years. A 130-year-old conglomerate that started in steel and textiles is now a serious contract manufacturer for the world's most valuable consumer electronics brand. So here's where the paradox from the start actually resolves. India isn't lying about the $4.118 trillion. That number is real, and the growth behind it is real. But growth and development aren't the same thing. A country can build a world-class export machine for iPhones while millions of its own graduates can't find a job, and while its 10-year-olds can't read the box the iPhone comes in. Both of those facts are true on the same afternoon, in the same country. That's not a contradiction. That's just what uneven growth looks like up close. Everyone's talking about India's economy right now, but almost nobody's asking who it's actually working for. One line to remember: growth counts the money. It doesn't count the people left out of it.